On a dark night when a terrible downpour was pouring down, a young beautiful girl got married. It was her second marriage. She was worried, but she didn't show her emotions. She was determined to make such a move. The priest asked the newlyweds if they vowed to be married for the rest of their lives. The young ones took turns swearing allegiance. The young lady in turn swore her loyalty and love for the rest of her life, and she also swore on her life. She only did it for her own revenge. At a dinner party at the Imperial Palace 5 months ago, the doctor congratulated Empress Olivia Roan on her pregnancy. The Empress was shocked and interrogated the doctor. She wanted to know if she was definitely pregnant. The man was very happy for his mistress. He said she was actually pregnant and congratulated her again on such great news. Everyone was frantically excited about the long-awaited addition to the imperial family. Gusto Ron, the Empress's consort, was surprised as there had been no news for 4 years in a row. He wondered why it was now, at a dinner party, that he was hearing such news. He knew that his spouse was not an easy woman, as she had, in his opinion, taken advantage of a one-night-stand mistake. The emperor was sure that his wife might not be carrying his child under her heart at all. He directly stated his thoughts to his spouse. He wasn't going to hide his thoughts. The emperor wanted to bring her out, as he did not believe the child could be his. Olivia was outraged by such words of her spouse, as they crossed all the boundaries of permissible. After all, she was a diligent wife and never did anything like that. The emperor was furious and said they would see whose child it was yet, as he was sure women did not forget their first men, and they often come back to them. He asked with a smirk at Lucas Biterfan's companion Duke, who had conquered the northern lands, wasn't he right about the situation? But the young Duke answered nothing to his barbs. The emperor was angry that the Duke pretended not to hear him. The emperor was very angry with the young men. Their appearance annoyed him. The emperor said he had to go now, as the news of the pregnancy had shocked him and he had lost his appetite. He wanted to leave their company as soon as possible. The emperor, with a fierce grin, wished the empress a pleasant appetite and a good evening with her former fiancé. He had no intention of tolerating their presence. He hated the mere thought of them. He wanted to destroy them. So I don't have to see them again. The young empress was very crushed. She didn't understand why it was her fault what had happened again. She was hurt by the emperor's words. He always blamed her for everything. She wanted to live a peaceful, quiet life and not feel guilty about everything. Lucas Biterfan is a prince who 16 years ago he lost his right to the throne. As a result of the coup d'état, he had lost everything the new one had left him. Emperor and his new title of Duke, more like a dog collar. From her very childhood, young Olivia was destined to become an empress. That's why Olivia and Lucas were engaged back in the day. But for the well-being of Olivia's family, she had to turn her back on the young man after the coup. She escaped and eventually became the wife of Gusto, the new emperor's son. But unfortunately, they couldn't fall in love, and the horrible night spent together was only once, when he had a fight with his mistress. Olivia knew that even though no one could congratulate her on such an important event, it was her baby, and no one would change that. The young empress knew that the mere fact that one person had appeared on her side was enough for her. The empress prayed frantically to the goddess and asked her to bless her newborn child, who was her great hope. She hoped the infant would be a support for her. She knew that with his help she could live, and she hoped to keep him safe. 5 months later, in the summertime on the streets of the city, everyone was frantically whispering and discussing the empress's pregnancy. It was very happy news for everyone. Then the news of the empress's pregnancy spread throughout the state, and everyone was very happy for the birth of the baby. The empress was disturbed by 2 men. They wanted to allocate an internal budget. Olivia was very surprised that there was some kind of mistake. She was sure he was already allocated a year ahead and didn't see where the problem arose. The very fact of the problem was incomprehensible to her. The man was very excited as the budget of the Pink Palace was already depleted due to unforeseen waste, and they said it was necessary to reallocate the budget of other palaces to take care of the financial problem. The empress was confused, as she knew that the Pink Palace was the palace where the current emperor's favorite concubine lived. Olivia knew the girl had a lot going for her. She frittered away money at the first opportunity. The young talent was called the most beautiful flower in the empire, but unfortunately, she had an arrogant and eccentric character. And with each passing day, the emperor's feelings for her grew deeper, and she in turn turned her nose up higher and higher. The empress knew that the young talent would one day take her place, but she was also fiercely angry with her and told her that she would not be able to get the palace budget. She couldn't let that happen. Olivia didn't want to share everything she had with her. Olivia said she has a baby on the way, so her palace is also on a budget. She had no intention of sacrificing the child's well-being for a concubine. Men would want to protest so that she would change her mind. The empress was serious and persistent. She said there was no way she would change her mind and asked them to leave her alone. She was angry with them since they had allowed themselves to cross her. The gentlemen were leaving in a hurry. Olivia knew that everyone knew that the ministers were to gather soon and prepare everything for the birth of a successor to the imperial family. However, none of the nobility, or even the emperor himself, showed the slightest interest in the empress's pregnancy. After the men left, she asked the maid why she wasn't leaving, as she said she wanted to be alone. The maid was persistent and told her that there was no way she could leave the empress when she was in that position. The empress was agitated, for the sovereign had turned over to her all affairs of state, and in 5 months he never showed his face to her. She thought he probably just wanted to observe what would happen to her and how she would handle you in such a tricky situation. A servant girl brought her empress a letter from the emperor. Olivia was surprised to receive a letter, as she hadn't expected such a thing since he hadn't shown up or sent a letter in 5 months. After reading it, she learned that the emperor wanted to come over for tea. She asked the maid to prepare tea and sweets after dinner. When they met, Olivia told her spouse that he could call her and she would come herself so he wouldn't have to drive that far. The emperor said he didn't want to alarm his pregnant wife and decided to come himself as it would look much better in the public eye. Olivia knew that every time her husband came to the palace, various unpleasant things happened to her, and so she was very nervous this evening. The emperor held out a small box containing a gift to her. The girl was surprised and asked what was inside the man said she needed to open and see for herself. When Olivia opened the box, she was overjoyed as she saw a small pair of shoes for the baby. She didn't expect such a thing from her spouse, since they weren't on very good terms, and she was confused. The man said it was the father's responsibility to prepare the first pair of shoes for the unborn child. The empress was surprised and asked him if he had made them himself. The emperor confirmed her words and said he thought he could handle the small shoes faster, but unfortunately, it turned out to be much more complicated than that. Olivia was greatly surprised. She hadn't expected this from the emperor, since I knew the other side of him, and it wasn't like him at all, but she hoped it was true. The emperor asked the empress in a trembling voice for forgiveness, for the news of the birth of the child was too sudden for him, and he did not know how to behave. He wanted to be a good father to their child. Olivia was confused and hesitant after his words. She was touched to the core by his sincerity, and thanked him for his warm words, as she knew he had not been a very good husband to her before. But now she believed he could change. The emperor said the thanks he wanted to hear not from her, directly from the baby. Olivia said that surely the baby would love his father's gift. The emperor asked in surprise how she could know such information if the baby was in her belly. Olivier said that even though the baby is in the belly, it still hears and recognizes the voices of the parents before and after birth. The emperor said with a smirk, the girl seemed to know a lot about children. Olivia said it was her first time becoming a mother, so she prepared a lot for the process itself by reading a lot of books. The maid poured tea for the girl, and she began to drink it without haste. The emperor said that in that case, he needed to talk to the child more often, and leisurely walked over to her and asked her to touch her belly. Olivia didn't refuse him. She said she feels like the little one is excited to meet his father, too. The emperor said with a smile that she had a strong child. Olivia was very pleased to know that the maids were telling the truth, that the emperor needed time to realize he was a father. She hoped their baby could receive real parental love from both parents. But suddenly, the white, bright day was overshadowed by Olivia's grave condition. She became very sick, and her mouth was bleeding. She was very scared and didn't understand what was going on. Olivia repeatedly wondered how come she was bleeding to death. From helplessness, the poor girl collapsed on the sofa. She was frantic, coughing up blood. Olivia was very scared and confused and didn't understand what was going on. The emperor in turn told her with a smirk that he thought it would be harder to kill her, but it was a lot easier than he thought it would be. The emperor laughed furiously. He looked at the young lady with utter contempt and asked her how their baby was feeling, if he was still as happy as before. He was glad that he was able to make his vision a reality. Olivia was falling into darkness. She didn't realize what was happening. She could hardly breathe, but she realized with clarity of thought that the life inside her was slowly fading away and leaving her. She frantically wanted to live, and she wanted her baby boy to live by her side. But unfortunately, I couldn't do anything about it. Olivia saw nothing and was falling into darkness. Only looking at the emperor did she hear his words. The emperor rejoiced at what was happening to the girl. Since his new companion made a big scandal when she learned of the empress's pregnancy, he said with a smirk that the problem from the beginning had been that this baby had appeared in her belly. As she was dying, Olivia apologized to her child for not being able to keep him. Choking on blood and with tears in her eyes, she knew she would follow him. The young girl woke up in tears. She didn't understand what was going on and where she was, but she clearly remembered drinking the poisoned tea and coughing up blood. The girl was sure she had died with her child. After realizing the situation, the girl felt very sick and vomited. She looked around the room and didn't realize where she was. The atmosphere in the room was unfamiliar. She ran near the mirror and didn't realize what she saw. She had a familiar feeling, but it drove her to confusion. When she looked in the mirror, she was shocked at what she saw, as it wasn't her reflection. Olivia was utterly confused and stared at her reflection in confusion. The girl ran outside in confusion. She didn't understand what was going on or how she ended up in a place like this. After all, she had never visited such places before. The girl decided to walk a little and see where she got, and I was in the nooks and crannies of the street. She clearly felt the coldness of the whole body. On such signs, she began to realize that she did not die, but unfortunately the baby who was her only support and hope died. The girl cried a lot as she realized that now she was left all alone and without her hope for a bright future together with her child. But still, she decided not to give up and take revenge for all her suffering on the man who did this to her. She decided to stick a knife in his body to make him pay for the death of her child. The young one especially knew that for the sake of her revenge, she must find out what had happened to her and be sure to make her plan a reality. The young woman approached the men, who appeared to be homeless, and asked what state she was in. She wondered how exactly she would be able to get to the imperial palace. The men saw her frail body and couldn't contain their lustful thoughts. 2 men approached her, and with a lustful smirk on their faces began to molest the young lady. They wanted her to have some fun with them. The girl frantically screamed and fought back. The frail young lady screamed for them to let her go. She didn't understand how dare he act so lewdly toward her. The men looked at her with contempt. They didn't care who was in front of them, as they didn't care if she was honorable at home or just some crazy woman. The girl knew there had to be some reason why she stayed alive, and she couldn't let them attack her. Olivia knew she had been given a second chance at life. She didn't want to let him go, and decided to fight to the last to survive and take revenge on her abusers. She bit the man who wanted to possess her with all her might and ran away. She ran with all her might. Men shouted after her, but she ignored them and tried to survive. She knew she had to get out of the alley. Olivia hoped that if she found her way out to the big road, surely someone would help her. She ran as fast as she could, but she was being chased. The men wanted to catch up with her. One of the men caught her by the shirt. The girl was dumbfounded. She did not know how to be and what to do, as a friend heard the sound of a carriage. Olivia was very glad that she heard the sound of a carriage approaching. She decided not to waste the opportunity and run for the big road. She knew it was certainly a big risk, but the only way to escape her pursuers. Olivia knew that in her previous life she had failed to protect herself or her child, but she was sure that this time would be different. For in this life, she would do anything for revenge, for her unborn child and for herself. She ran out into the street and was hit by a carriage, and a horse came upon her. The girl was lying on the road. The man who was in the carriage asked his companion who was driving the carriage what had happened. The man bent over the girl's body and said there was an accident as the young lady jumped out unexpectedly onto the road from around a corner. They were being watched intently by one of a company of men who wanted to amuse themselves with the young lady. One of the pursuers was approached by 2 others, the man saying that the girl had been hit by an aristocrat's carriage and they'd better not mess with them. The distraught men broke into a street corner. The girl was motionless, lying on the ground. She had fainted, and the men surrounding her who were riding in the carriage thought someone was chasing her. The young man looked intently at the young defenseless girl and ordered his servant to get her into a carriage so that he could take her home. Olivia woke up to a bright light. It was hard for her to realize where she was. Waking up, she saw the man beside her. It was Raven. He asked her if she was okay. The girl blanched. She didn't know what to answer. Raven looked at her and said she had been hit by a carriage. But luckily for her, there was no serious damage, but also asked how she was feeling after everything she had been through. Raven was the son of the former emperor's physician. After the coup, he disappeared as he followed Lucas. Olivia looked at the young man. She thought he was dead, but luckily he was alive and helped her a lot. She thought for a bit and realized that the carriage that hit her was Lucas's carriage. She also realized that she was in his estate. She got very nervous. The girl decided not to panic and calm down. She thought that perhaps she had survived thanks to the goddess she had prayed to so often. She knew it was a chance to pay back the day she had to avenge the death of her child who died at the hands of her father. The young doctor looked at his patient and said that she was in a terrible condition. He also said that she should drink medicine after eating. Before he could finish, Olivia interrupted him and asked him to give the message to his master. She said that Golden Rose had come to meet the Black Wolf. A couple of children were sitting in a beautiful garden. The boy told his friend that he wished the people of the state lived in peace and harmony, just as his father had wanted. The young man said that, unfortunately, lately he began to doubt the correctness of his judgment. He always knew that his words sounded too utopian. But at this point, the most people are following his father and him, not Gusto's father. The boy bowed his head to the young lady and said he was haunted by a bad feeling. He thought there was only pitch darkness ahead of him. The young girl smiled and said with all affection that in that case she would always be by his side and light his hard path. She said she would be a bright golden rose and go to meet him. The girl added that she will go to meet the brave Black Wolf who will guide the state. The young boy was very surprised at her words. He was touched to the core. The young doctor relayed the girl's words to his master. The man was confused. He didn't understand how such a young lady could know his secret, since he had made a promise to his childhood friend. That day, they came up with their own secret cipher that became a secret to others. But he didn't understand how the girl he ran into on Poor Man Street could know about such a thing. The young master assumed that this could not be a mere coincidence. He thought that the girl might have deliberately planned this situation to get close to him. The man decided not to postpone and not to shift the solution to this situation to someone else. He realized that he needed to check everything personally to deal with the young girl who called herself a Golden Rose. Olivia stood looking out the window. She realized that in order to avenge the emperor for what she had done, she had to have someone with her who could infiltrate the imperial palace. She knew she needed status so she could be around Lucas. A young gentleman came to her room and asked her who she was. There was anger and impatience in his voice. He wanted to be quick, to get to the bottom of the situation and find out from whom and how she could have heard his cipher with another person. The young lady was very scared to go out with him, but she knew that if she stopped now, she wouldn't be able to start anything. She decided not to lose her chance at a different life and decided to take matters into her own hands. She turned to the man at full steam and said that the Empress was dead because she had fallen into the Emperor's trap. The man was in shock. Her words hurt him. He didn't believe her words. In a rage, he threw himself on her and started choking her. He was angry and said with impatience in his voice that he couldn't trust some stranger and believe her lies. With all the anger in his voice, he ordered her to immediately tell the truth about everything, namely, who had sent her to him. Olivia gasped, finding it hard to breathe as a strong male hand clutched her throat. Gasping, she could only mutter that she was Miss Olivia's shadow, and since she had been given an order, she had come to the manor to carry it out. She frantically begged him to listen to her. The man was shocked. He questioned her if she was sure she had come on Olivia's orders. The girl confirmed her words once more. She knew that if she told him what Olivia really was, he wouldn't believe her. She knew she had to get a place with Lucas fast, and she'd do anything to get it. Olivia looked at him and said she would help him get his crown back, but he had to marry her first. The man looked at her with a smirk. He said she's good at picking up expressions, and she speaks beautifully. He asked her how she could so easily get the crown of the state after they were married. From a very young age, Olivia was quite a bright girl, but unfortunately, one thing she failed to foresee was that she would die and lose a child. After she betrayed the entire Lucas family, she saw him a few more times. Childhood friends began to avoid each other. Olivia thought he had completely erased her and his feelings for her, and of his memory, she suspected he hated her. Olivia knew she had to put her plan into action for what it was, and she needed him by her side. She realized that such a tricky situation would require her to reveal her trump card. Olivier told the man that the Empress had told her where his little sister was before she died. At what he heard, the young gentleman froze in place. Princess Serena is Lucas's younger sister, who was stolen during the coup and held hostage. Gusto used the safety of the princess to twist Lucas around as he pleased. After news of the pregnancy, Olivia began gathering information about Princess's whereabouts. She knew of the Emperor's weakness and had been saving such information just in case to protect her future child, but she couldn't even think of having to use it this way. Lucas looked at her and said that if she was lying to him, she was unlikely to keep her life. Olivia said that he needed to marry her and she would show him where the princess was. She added that she didn't require organizing a belt celebration, and she also didn't need love or his status. She only wanted revenge and to regain his throne. Olivia looked at him and said that it would be beneficial to both of them. The man looked at her and pondered her words. In turn, Olivia worried whether he would give his consent to her proposal. She knew that if he thought too long, it would be costly to do anything about it. Olivia knew that no one knew she was dead yet, but she knew it hadn't been that long since she died. She approached the man and said that they needed to hurry, as corpses decompose quickly in the summer, and the imperial palace wouldn't be able to hide the Empress's death for long. So they only had 3 days, and once the death was announced, they couldn't get married because of the funeral. Olivia said that if the princess was moved elsewhere, her information would be useless. She also said that if he had any doubts, he could leave her here. He looked at her with a smile and asked if she really thought that would be enough. Olivia became frustrated as she thought that she hadn't been able to convince him. Lucasa grabbed her waist with one hand, the other gently stroking her face. He said that when they got married, she would have to do different things, and with a smirk on his face asked if she could do everything. Lucas said he could find no other explanation for the sudden proposal in the middle of the night. Unless it's love to the grave, the girl is very confused. She said she hadn't thought of it that way, but she would do her best. She asked him, averting her eyes from his face, whether he wanted her to prove her intentions to him right now. Lucas ordered a servant to find some aristocrat so they could disguise her on her lady as her. Lucas said to his companions that he was marrying a young lady tonight, so they needed to find a priest to perform their ceremony. The men were shocked. They didn't understand what was going on and why so suddenly the gentleman wanted to get married. Leaving the young lady, Lucas asked if she had seen the Empress in the last moments of her life. The girl hesitated, but answered him that she had seen her. After Lucas left, the girl breathed a sigh of relief. She was very glad it was over, but unfortunately her strength left her, and she fell breathlessly to the floor. Men ran up to her, the healer asking her to wake up as she couldn't just pick up and pass out. He didn't understand who she was or why things were happening like this. The men came to their master. They were furious and did not understand what was happening. Lucas told them everything about her. They asked him tons of questions and didn't understand how he could trust her. Lucas said he kissed his spies into the palace, but no one had heard of the Empress's death. The man was sure that if it turned out to be true, she was the Empress's shadow. But he also knew that this could prove to be a trap for him, and he needed to be cautious and careful. However, he knew that only Olivia and him knew such a promise. The man wondered if she wasn't her shadow. How could she know such details? Lucas asked one of his companions to find out all about the stranger. The young lady was being prepared for the upcoming gala. The maids said they had prepared everything hastily and didn't know if she would like it or not, but they also said that even in such a hurry, she looked fiercely beautiful. Lucas looked at the arriving bride and asked if she was ready or not. If so, they can go in. The girl said she was ready. The priest performed the marriage ceremony according to all the rules. Standing at the altar, Olivia reflected on the situation. This was her second wedding and second wedding dress. She knew that a second life and all the opportunities afforded to her by such a great miracle was something she would never pass up. She swore her life before the priest and consented to the marriage. The priest said that in that case, they could kiss each other. Lucas walks up to her and tells her he's giving her one last chance since it's not just a wedding, but a big risk. So, if she doesn't intend to follow through, she can run away right now. He looked her in the eye and told her that she would have no way to turn back time later. The girl looked into his eyes and said he misunderstood her, as she wasn't going to run. Lucas said he too would fight to the last man. The young men melded together in a passionate kiss. Olivia put everything she had on the line. The priest said they are now one. Lucas looked at her and said that they were finally husband and wife after all. Olivia congratulated him and said that he had become her true master. Lucas asked the priest if the marriage ceremony was over. The priest looked at him confused and said it was over. Lucas hastily lifted his wife into his arms and apologized to the priest, as he was anxious to spend his wedding night. He said they needed to leave. When the couple was alone, Lucas told his wife that she was pretty good at faking it. Olivia said that she had to pretend that she was crazy about him since she was willing to marry him with that age difference. Olivia said she almost didn't believe what he said. Lucas looked at her and said that they had managed to fool the priest. Lucas decided to put their wedding night on hold and get straight to the point. He asked where his sister was. Olivia said he needed to find a 14-year-old boy named Noah who lives in an orphanage. Lucas wondered he didn't understand why he should be looking for the boy. Lucas has turned the entire empire over in search of his own sister, but he never imagined she would live and pretend to be a young boy. Lucas invited Winter in and asked him if there were any knights who could leave right away and bring the princess to the capital. Winter said the men were there and he would be able to fulfill his assignment. Olivia said that now that the empress is dead, there must be chaos going on in the imperial palace's official structure. Winter said that's why they should act now, as it's at times like this that the emperor will be watching his highness even more, and there's a chance he'll use this situation to his advantage. They knew they had to find another way to fulfill what they had planned. Olivia asked if they were aware that there was a festival coming up. She offered to take the princess out and meet her later, citing her desire to have fun at the festival. Lucas hesitated as he felt that such a plan would be safer. He said to secretly send 2 knights there so that the emperor wouldn't suspect anything. His companion said that if they sent knights there, Lucas's safety would be jeopardized. Lucas said that the dangerous game had started long ago. The man was confused and didn't understand how he could still let someone do this to him. Winter apologized and said he would definitely get things done and get people ready. Late at night, everyone in the city heard the bells ringing throughout the imperial palace. The ringing of the bells reached the 3 companions as well. They heard the loud ringing of bells that proclaimed the death of the empress. Lucas was tasked with the fact that it turned out to be true after all. Lucas hurriedly removed himself from the room. He said he was sorry that the first official event after their wedding was the empress's funeral. Olivia was determined to execute the plan. So, she said that the funeral, on the contrary, could be a great chance to fulfill the plan. Lucas provided the girl with the documents so that she could read everything and fulfill her role properly. Briella Ford is the illegitimate daughter of an aristocrat from the northern lands, who may well have had the blood of a savage in her. The young girl was 20 years old. She worked very hard to get to the capital. Olivia knew that such a choice was a very good one, since she had been in the north before Lucas arrived in the capital. Olivier asked Lucas if the aristocrat was also one of his men, and where she was now. Lucas said the girl was dead, and since she was attacked by the savages while she was up north. Olivia was overshadowed by such famous ones. She didn't realize just how many deaths he had seen in his path. She hoped that with her arrival, his path would be strewn with nothing but flowers. Lucas's friend ran into his office and told him that a messenger from the imperial palace had arrived. He was beyond excited, everything that was going on. As I was worried about the safety and well-being of everyone present, Lucas looked at him and said that the messenger had arrived at his place faster than he had expected. He asked Olivia if she was ready. The girl walked over to the Amun and threw away all the papers she was reading. She said she had learned all the information about the girl. Olivia steeled herself, straightened up, and said they needed to head to the palace. She knew they needed to get to the fulfillment of the plan soon. Lucas met a messenger who informed him that the empress had left the world, and he needed to report to the palace as soon as possible. Lucas squeezed the papers with the information and said he would arrive. But he also added that there is a new person in the family, and so there will be 2 people from their lineage at the funeral. Lucas said with a smirk on his face that he got married today. He eagerly awaited the emperor's reaction to such news. He wanted to jab the emperor harder. Olivia said such a chaste dress would not do. The maids were a bit confused and said it was the funeral of the empress herself, and even more so, it's being published for the first time. Olivia smiled and said that the dress wouldn't fit for those reasons and asked them if they had another dress. The maid was shocked. She asked her mistress what dress she wished and also said that by looking inappropriate, she might embarrass the Duke in front of all the aristocrats who would be present. Olivia looked at the maids and asked with a smirk on her face how they knew where she was going for a funeral or a celebration. Olivia knew that death could very well be a celebration for someone, and perhaps she would gain a status she had no way of gaining. Olivia asked the maid if she knew how the Empress was treated at the palace. The maid hesitated, not sure what to say. Olivia asked the maid if she would suggest that she cry in front of the joyous Emperor. The maid would be shocked and couldn't answer anything. The girl said that she wasn't going to go there and grieve over the death of the Empress, as she was going there to tell everyone about the arrival of a new member of the family, and to do so naturally needed to attract everyone's attention. The young mistress said that for this, she naturally needed to attract a lot of attention to her person, and she knew that no matter what he designed of the dress, the main thing was to be black in color. Olivia rode in the carriage and contemplated the imperial castle. She felt a little funny about the fact that she had come to consider her own funeral. She didn't even think she'd be invited by anyone to her own funeral. Her spouse stared intently at her image. She asked what happened. Lucas said her clothes were too bright. Olivia looked at him and asked if he was aware that this was truly a holiday for the imperial family. So she dressed appropriately. The Duke looked at his consort and said he had a feeling she had already been to the imperial castle. The girl said she wouldn't be recognized at the castle. The man stared at her intently and didn't understand how a 20-year-old girl managed to act like that. She wasn't worried and calmly rode to the imperial palace. The man knew that compared to her courage and willingness to do anything for the cause, his worries seemed meaningless. The girl wondered for a moment how she could have lived like this all the time. She didn't understand how she could tolerate all the humiliation. She wanted to get revenge on her abusers for what she had been through as soon as possible. They arrived at the entrance of the imperial palace. Lucas stepped out of the carriage and offered his spouse his hand. He said that as long as she was going by her new name, her place was by his side. Lucas asked her to keep that in mind. No sooner were they out of the carriage than a man came up to them and said that His Majesty was expecting them. Lucas said he hadn't had a chance to say goodbye to the Empress yet. The frightened Favor said that the Emperor wishes to see them. Also, he added, doesn't he know that the affairs of the living are more important than the affairs of the dead? Olivia and Lucas looked at the servant with indignation, but hurried to follow him. As they walked, everyone was frantically looking at them and discussing them. The noble ladies did not understand how the Duke could marry such a young girl. After all, they had a very large age difference. Olivia was by his side, and only now she realized that her spouse had to constantly endure various insults in his direction. She knew that if even the courtiers allowed themselves to speak much about him, the Emperor in turn thought and spoke even worse of him. She knew that her spouse would have to endure a lot of insults. However, she knew that it was not yet time for revenge, as I was, and it was necessary to lay low and wait for an opportunity. The Emperor, with a smirk on his face, greeted them politely. The Emperor said he was greatly disappointed in the Duke, as he had sent him to save the people of the Empire from the savages, and he was having an affair. He was very curious about this girl, since he had decided to marry her. The Emperor approached Olivia, who bowed her head to His Majesty. He asked her if she was a new member of the family, and also told her that there was no need to bow anymore, as he wanted to see her face. The girl obediently raised her head and greeted the Emperor. She was very happy to meet him. The Emperor was a little amused by the fact that she was trembling, but still looking him straight in the face. He didn't understand whether she was stupid or inquisitive. The Emperor looked at her and said with a chuckle that he could not believe that she had captured the Duke's heart. But after he saw her, he understood. He also added that he was informed that she was from the north. The Emperor looked at her hair. He noticed they were an unusual color. He frantically wanted to know all the information about his companions. He looked straight into her eyes, holding her hair in his hand, and with a smirk, asked her the love-blood of a savage flows. Lucas did not at all like this curiosity and the manner in which the Emperor spoke to his consort. He grabbed his arm and told him that they had only recently ended the war with the savages. The Emperor looked at him and said that he was right, and the Duke's momentous prank was proof of that. The Emperor was amused by this behavior of the Duke, as he began to be impertinent to his master. For touching his wife, he learned that he would have to appease him a little. The emperor asked with all anger whether he remembered the princess while he was on his way to the wedding with the new girl. The emperor said, looking like he had forgotten the young princess after all. The young girl looked at her husband and realized that the emperor was provoking Lucas on purpose in the most despicable way. But she knew better than to fall for such provocation and keep her emotions in check. She couldn't allow a single reservation. Olivia looked at her husband gently and took his hand. He looked at her, and in her eyes she read calmness and peace. She was reassuring him. The Duke said that if the emperor would give him the opportunity to see Serena, he would be very grateful, and asked him to escort the emperor personally. The one was in shock and didn't realize what was going on. The emperor eyed him with misunderstanding, since he should have just clenched his fists as he taunted him. He looked at the young woman and realized that she was the cause. The emperor looked in their direction and said disdainfully that they needed to leave. Since it is already necessary to bid farewell to the late empress while they hurried to the door in a hurry, the emperor asked them if he had heard her die. He said that the empress was a chaste and prudent mother of the empire. The emperor said that the empress was having an affair on the side, and whoever her lover was, it was very strong impudence on his part. And with the birth of a child, the whole truth would come out. He said with a smirk, that was why she was facing death. Lucas wanted to respond to the emperor's provocation, but Olivia couldn't let that happen. She knew her husband might not hold back and say too much, which was certainly not her intention. She said that the emperor had experienced unfortunate events tarnishing his authority. She offered her condolences to him, also said that they needed to leave him. The emperor was furiously angry, as this was not the kind of response he had expected. He wanted to provoke them into conflicts and anger Herzen, but unfortunately, he failed. People came to see the late empress. They all wanted to escort the empress to her final resting place. Olivia stood and held the flower she was given upon entering, and asked to honor with an offering. Olivia watched her own funeral from the sidelines, and understood that they weren't organized, and understood that the imperial family didn't really bother, but she wasn't surprised. Olivia overheard the ladies talking. At such an event, high-ranking ladies discussed the treason of the empress, as well as the duke's wedding. Olivia stood looking at them and smiled as she realized that people were the same everywhere. They were a little puzzled by her reaction and didn't understand why she was standing there smiling. The ladies decided to wipe the smirk off her face. They came closer to her and asked why she wasn't putting the flower down, as the empress would soon be given to the earth. Olivia smiled and said that in that case she needed to leave. All the ladies frantically wished for the young lady's failure, as they knew she was a northerner and had nowhere to learn the etiquette of an imperial funeral. The dead empress lay motionless. Olivia looked at her own former body and felt very sad about her unborn child as well as her past life. But she knew she had taught farewells for the imperial family and would be able to perform the ritual over her own body. The girl performed the ritual and said goodbye to the life she had lived for her family and others. Everyone around her looked at her and didn't understand how she could perform the imperial ritual perfectly and without a single misstep. A few minutes later, a man came in and said that it was time for the members of the imperial family to bid farewell to the body of the deceased, and everyone else was asked to go to the cemetery. The young men also followed to the cemetery, with all who were at the funeral. But suddenly, Olivia remembered that she hadn't done something. She hurriedly ran to the hall, telling her spouse that she had forgotten something in the funeral parlor, and she would be right back, so that he could go forward. He was in shock. Olivia hurried with all her might. She realized what she was doing as she was distracted by the court lords and didn't say a word to her dead child. And if she leaves like that, she'll be eaten up by regret. She knew she had an opportunity to talk to him, and there was no way she could pass it up. The girl entered the funeral parlor, expecting that no one would be there, so she could quickly say goodbye to the baby. But unfortunately, what she saw shocked her. She saw the emperor and her father, causing her great confusion and misunderstanding. Since she was sure that there was nothing between them, and nothing could bind them together. Marquis Rona is Olivia's father, a man obsessed with the importance of family and duty. Therefore, the girl was raised solely for the good of the family. She was given to the emperor by her father's will. Unfortunately, she was sold like a piece of junk. Her father knew better than anyone how the imperial family had gotten him, only she had never heard a single word of comfort from her father. Olivia didn't understand why they were standing there casually making conversation. She frantically wanted to know what they were talking about. The emperor told his companion that they could speak freely since all the men had been taken away, and they were left just the two of them. The emperor looked at him and said that, first of all, he was very sorry for what had happened. The emperor looked at him and said that, so as they had agreed. He thought of dealing with the empress next year, but his new chosen one was very scandalous, and to be left without her was very undesirable. Olivia was at a loss for words and didn't realize what was even happening. She was shocked that her own father had helped kill her. She didn't understand what he had to go to such lengths for. The Marquis of Rona said that the emperor followed such a decision after carefully considering the entire situation, and he in turn always follows his decisions. The emperor looked at him and said with a quip that the Marquis had a good tongue and would not mind having a drink and listening to his toasts. Olivia was confused. She didn't understand how her father could have a hand in the death of his own daughter. She wondered if selling it for a family conclusion wasn't enough. Of course, she had expected various meannesses and behaviors on her father's part, but not on such a large scale. She tried very hard to gain acceptance, but her whole body was trembling, and there were only feelings of betrayal. The young gentleman interrupted their conversation as they heard an extraneous noise from around the corner. Marquis said it was probably some kind of rat hiding. The emperor decided to see who was there and what. Olivia sat silent and still, fear gripping her, and the inevitable notion that she was finished. She didn't know what might happen now, and didn't know what to do from fear her legs wouldn't obey her. She knew she was about to be exposed. The emperor peeked around the corner and saw nothing. He hesitated as he obviously heard something. He was furious, as he was sure he had heard someone. He wanted to punish whoever was eavesdropping on him. Olivia was suddenly pulled away by her spouse. They stood a little farther away, hidden from view. Lucas put his hand over her mouth so she couldn't say anything and give them away, and suddenly a rat came out of nowhere. The emperor saw and was a little surprised. He crushed the small body of the fleeing animal with his foot. Her blood splattered on his face. He said with all the anger in the world that he would do that to anyone he could get his hands on. He was walking off into the distance, and the couple stood hidden in the shadows, in the expectation that the emperor would sooner leave them. Lucas wanted to know what the emperor and the Marquis of Rona were doing alone, and what kind of conversation they were having. But he also knew that in any case, they needed to get away from such a place as soon as possible, since his spouse was trembling violently. Lucas said they needed to get back soon, so that no one would see their absence and think anything unnecessary. He said he would carry her in his arms, so she wouldn't make too much noise. They stepped outside, and Olivia breathed a sigh of relief. She was pleased that no one had noticed them, and everything had gone well. Lucas frantically wanted to know what was wrong, and why she had snapped and run away. The young girl apologized to her husband and asked why he went after her. Lucas looked at her and said that since they were newlyweds, they better not walk apart. But on top of all that, in that moment, he saw for the first time the confusion of this exceptionally fearless woman. He knew that the presence of two men in a place like this was for a reason. Lucas looked at her and said that if she didn't want to tell him why she ran away, then he wouldn't pry and question her. Their casual conversation was interrupted by the Marquis. Lucas introduced his spouse to him. Marquis said they were in the wrong place to meet right now. He wanted to continue their casual conversation at another time and place. The Marquis resolved to make haste and leave their society at once. Olivia decided not to let him go. Just so she said, there were nasty rumors about the Empress's death, but she was glad to see him so awake. The Marquis looked at her and said that his daughter's unworthy behavior had given the Duchess a bad feeling and begged her pardon. Lucas looked at his spouse and said he didn't understand what was going on. He also didn't know what she saw. But if she wants to cry, she shouldn't have kept it to herself, as today is the local day for tears. Olivia didn't hold back her emotions, and tears rolled down her cheek quietly. She knew she needed to cry and not hold back. It was very hard for her to bear such a betrayal. After the funeral of a member of the imperial family, mourning lasts for about a week, but in Olivia's case, it was reduced to 3 days, so it was over. After the funeral, Olivia got a little sick. She didn't know if her condition was due to shock or just lack of rest after being reborn. But when they returned from the funeral, she went to bed for 3 days. The heat, which rose like a mariva on a summer's day, did not recede for a moment. And then a few days later, an invitation arrived in her new name. Olivia marveled at the invitation at such a time she saw the familiar seal from the imperial palace. When she opened it, she saw that the sender was the emperor's favorite concubine. A butler approached Olivia and clarified that a letter had arrived from the emperor's concubine. She said there was a letter from her. Olivia hadn't counted on this turn. She knew that there might be something like this from the imperial family and his cronies also. She thought that she now had more opponents than she had before. Olivia knew the girl didn't have as much influence as she used to have, but she used the imperial seal often. The man asked if the lady would like to prepare clothes and jewelry for herself for such an occasion, since he knew many married women preferred Mrs. Blanc's outfits. The young girl knew that Mrs. Blanc was a famous, promising designer. The butler said that she had certainly had things prepared for her at the manor, but still not enough. Olivia pondered his words. Since he was undoubtedly right in fact, she had married the Duke with absolutely no dowry. She felt bad about the situation and didn't even want to remember. She agreed with the man, since she knew she had a lot to prepare. She asked the butler to prepare a letter in her place with a reply. He dutifully agreed. Olivia came to see her spouse because she wanted to talk to him. Lucas said he wouldn't mind talking to her either. He asked how she was feeling, as the Baron was going crazy as she had been unwell for several days due to severe overwork. The girl said she was fine, and he shouldn't worry, she had already recovered. Olivia asked her spouse what he wanted to talk to her about. The man said someone was assigned to Serena. The girl was greatly surprised. He said she didn't see it coming. Olivia said that the Empress had figured out the princess's location shortly before she died. Olivia knew that if it hadn't been for carelessness on her part, perhaps they would have been able to find her sooner, and her husband wouldn't have had to endure more injustice to his person and suffer for it. Pondering the situation, she stood and bit her lips frantically. Lucas walked over to her and calmed her down a bit, so much so that she stopped biting her lips. He told her it wasn't her fault, much less her lips. Olivia asked if he was angry with her. Lucas said he didn't know what the Emperor was thinking, but she made him aware of Serena's situation, and he was very grateful for the information. Lucas told her that she knew for sure what his kind called dogs on a leash, but it would be different with her, and despite the burden of the family name. She decided on her own to become godsend with him. So if she's depressed, they're going to have a lot of problems. Olivia looked at him and said she would keep his every word in mind. Lucas looked at her and said that, at any rate, they needed to observe the situation and adjust their plan if possible. Also said that he saw her genuine feelings for Olivia, but her personality still raises a lot of questions for him. But since she's his wife, she's allowed to take as much as she needs from the Duke's budget. Olivia stared intently into his eyes. Lucas asked if that's what she came to him for or not. The girl hesitated. She didn't know what to answer as she realized she was beginning to be trusted. He looked at her and asked with a smile if they should remodel the estate to suit the new mistress. Olivia laughed, but also said that there was no need for them to do anything as he would soon be back in his real home. She said it wouldn't take 2 winters for him to step in and claim the throne. Lucas was surprised and asked her if she really wanted to help him. Olivia said that from the beginning, she was frantic to help him. Thanks to his faith in her, however, she realized it more clearly. Lucas was surprised, as he hadn't expected to hear such a thing. She knew it was already time to part with the shadow of Olivia buried beneath the earth. She knew that the Emperor and his lover, as well as her father, had made their move, which means it's up to her to retaliate. At least, little by little, you have to move forward to reach your goal. Lucas stood and pondered as he thought the whole situation going on looked very strange. Since even though he met his spouse in the slums, but her every movement exudes nobility as if she was given a decent upbringing. He noticed that her habits and beautiful smile constantly reminded him of someone, just like the one who had turned her back on him, but still he wondered who she was. Mrs. Blanc received a letter from Olivia. Mrs. Blanc did not know how she should handle such a situation, as her status did not allow her to ignore the Duchess, but she wanted to convey to the young savage that she was a high-flying bird. Mistress decided to hold off on answering for a bit. Olivia asked the butler if Mrs. Blanc had written back to her. The butler said it was unfortunate there was no response from her. She knew that Mrs. Blanc was weighing the possibility of cooperation. Olivia knew she would have to be the first to shift the scales in her direction, so she decided to drive to the store herself. She wanted to show her which of the two was the weightier of the two. The man ran up to Mrs. Blanc in a hurry. The man said she had a new letter from the Bitterfans estate. It was reported that they would come directly to the store. The mistress knew that if word got out that the Duchess herself had come to the commoner's house, her reputation would suffer greatly. She hadn't expected a personal visit from her at all. She told him to get everything ready, and she would leave for the estate immediately. But the man said that the Duchess was on her way at the moment, and she would arrive soon. Olivia walked into the store and frantically looked at all the beauty of the place, as there was so much of the designer's work on display. The lady greeted the Duchess and said she was very happy to meet her. Olivia looked up at her from her smile, saying that finally their meeting was happening after a long wait. The mistress said she was preparing for the Duchess's arrival in a hurry. So having organized a modest tea party, she invited the Duchess to sit down and help herself. Olivier told Mrs. Blanc that her letters still went unanswered, and she was very anxious about it, so much so that she had to come and see her in person, to make sure the mistress is in good health. Mrs. Blanc politely thanked the Duchess for her concern, as her illness forced her to take a temporary rest. Olivia wasn't surprised by that answer, but still expected her to come up with something more plausible. They sat drinking tea. Olivia told her to leave her little tricks and not mess with her head. The mistress hesitated, a shiver running through her. She told the Duchess that as she was a northerner, she had a very sharp tongue. Olivier said she didn't need her ridiculous remarks. The mistress knew that the Duchess had wild blood running through her and knew what was rumored to be a very timid and weak woman. But after the conversation, I'm convinced it's different. The mistress asked the Duchess why she'd come after all. She was mortified that she had been rude to her. Olivia said it was unlikely, so who ignored the Duchess's orders was entitled to say so. Olivia had only one reason why she needed mistress. Olivia said that if she had betrayed plain clothes, she would never have come here. Mrs. Blanc was surprised at her words, but Olivia said she was talking about the elegance of the clothes she was making. She believed that her outfits had the characteristic of making the person who wore them stand out, independent of the season and fashion. Mrs. Blanc was very grateful to the young Duchess for her words. Olivia said that mistress's work could not be valued in money because she believed she did not need it, since clothes represented money, nobility, and influence. The mistress thought that the Duchess was probably arriving in a good mood. Olivia said the clothes are certainly noble and unrivaled, but she also asked about the nobility of the garment maker itself. Mistress knew that she was rejected by all the nobility. She started sewing as early as 10 years old, so everything she had she got on her own. Without anyone's help, and many aristocrats attended balls in her clothes, but she was never invited. Since the commoner was not on their level, no matter how many auctions Mrs. Blanc would not hold, and at whatever high prices she did not sell clothes, the nobility still did not consider her a noblewoman. Olivia looked at her and offered status and influence. The mistress asked how she could offer her status if she was a duchess. Olivia said that she wasn't offering her status, just to help her get her old place back. According to imperial information, Mrs. Blanc's birth father was a pure nobleman, and he had to marry a woman of proper status. Mrs. Blanc's commoner mother had no choice but to leave with her child. The lady hid the fact that she was the illegitimate daughter of a nobleman, and apparently, like her mother, lived without status. Mrs. Blanc said to the Duchess that she did not know how she knew all about it, but the place was only half hers. Olivia said for mistress to think about her son's future and a life in which he could get something more, rather than one in which it was simply impossible to break into high society. Olivia is certain that what she wants most of all is a good future for her son. She asked her if such a deal wasn't attractive. Mistress looked at her and asked with all determination what she should do. Olivia has arrived to tea with Eva Perrin. The weather was just marvelous out there. The sun was shining and the day was clear. The butler introduced the young ladies to the Duchess. The young ladies talked about this year's harvest and quality wine. Olivia looked at them and realized they were pretending like she wasn't here. She smiled, as this was childishness of pure water. She decided to play with them a little. She turned around and started to walk away. Pallas was shocked and asked what happened. Olivia said she assumed that no one had invited her and would intentionally go back. She also added that among those attending the tea party is clearly not a person who is authorized to use the imperial seal. After saying the Duchess's words, Eve became very angry. She was beyond furious. The doctor asked Lucas what he was going to do with the young lady. Considering his decision to secretly marry, they both didn't seem like a special couple. The doctor said he thought for a long time about how Lucas would act in the marriage, but noticed he had changed a lot. Raven said that Lucas needed to take charge of the lady, as she was now in the public eye of many, and a small misstep was enough to arouse much suspicion in her direction. Olivia stood within sight of the young ladies who were watching her intently. The Duchess said she should meet the holder of the imperial seal, who was writing her a letter. Since the Empress was not present, it means that the Emperor himself wrote the letter. With her behavior and the Duchess was able to anger Eva, she liked her reaction. On provocation, Olivia knew that the fact that the girl was taking the seal of the imperial family, and no cause for ridicule among the nobility if they found out. The Emperor came up to the Duchess and said he was a little late. He apologized for inviting guests and making them wait a long time, so much so that he asked her to forgive his rudeness. Olivia was shocked. She didn't expect to be invited by the Emperor himself. She would want to know what he needed, and why he invited her. He was rushed to the Emperor. Olivia greeted the Emperor with all courtesy. The Emperor said he had an urgent matter, so to prepare for the Duchess's arrival, he asked Eve. Olivia said the girl wasn't paying attention to her at all, so she figured she was in the wrong place. The Emperor gently touched his hand to Eva's face and asked if she was all right, or if she wasn't feeling well. Eva said she was feeling a little unwell. Olivia marveled that the Emperor was capable of such affection. The Emperor invited all the young ladies to the table, and they proceeded to tea. The Emperor asked if everyone was aware that the Duke had married. So now this meeting was a small reception in honor of the Duchess. The Duchess was surprised. She said that she didn't think that the Emperor himself would personally organize the meeting. One of the ladies present at the tea party told the Emperor that he had a boundless soul. The Emperor looked at them and said that his true duty was to take care of his subjects, and added that the secret wedding was somewhat discouraging to him. The Emperor watched and observed the Duchess's behavior closely. He looked at her and said he thought he'd heard about her being brought from up north. But she's got a knack for etiquette. The young Duchess said that thanks to the Duke, she has learned a lot as he has taught her everything. The Emperor was surprised at this behavior of the Duke, as he thought he was only interested in stabbings, but he seems to have been very nice to his wife. The Duchess looked at the humble cup of tea and said with tenderness and warmth in her voice that the Duke had been very kind to her. She also added that he is the kindest person in the world. The Emperor looked at her and thought she looked a lot like the day moon. Eva said with a smirk that the Duchess is an outsider and apparently doesn't really understand how the Emperor feels about the Duke. The other ladies backed her up and said that the Duke need not go into her pocket for a word, for sometimes he gave her a cold chill. Olivia didn't want to hear that about her spouse. She decided to change the subject. The lovely ladies saw the gloves on the Duchess. They were surprised by him, and they really liked the gloves. They said they had never seen such beauty. The Duchess said it was a beautiful piece of work by Mrs. Blanc. And she also added that the lady has recently become her personal fashion designer. The girls were a little surprised, and said it was the first time they had heard of such a person, and also added that no noble woman in the capital had a personal fashion designer. Olivia was very happy to be able to rub the young lady's nose in it. She said with a smile that she would then be the first woman to have her own personal fashion designer. Eve was very angry at what she heard. She restrained herself so as not to bring trouble upon herself, and said with a smile that the Duchess had very large appetites, since he wants to get his own personal fashion designer. But of course, you can't tell from the looks of it. Olivia said that it wasn't about greed at all, but that she didn't want to wear the same clothes that the other ladies had. Olivia looked at him and decided to have a little fun. She said that paying attention to another person means showing respect, which is closer to being courteous. The Duchess said she tried very hard to meet each of them. Eve got really pissed off. After the words of the young duchesses, since only a former empress could address her like that, and it really pissed her off. The Emperor looked at the young ladies squabbling and realized that she was quite skilled at talking to noble ladies, but he decided not to get involved and wanted them to sort it out themselves. He decided to leave them, citing that he had much to do and must hurry to his counselor. Eva walked over to the Emperor and hugged him gently, and asked him if he had forgotten anything before he left. The emperor said he never forgets anything. The young ladies looked at their beautiful couple. One of the ladies said they were acting very romantic. Olivia looked, and she was very uncomfortable, as the emperor didn't act like that with her. Unexpectedly, the duke himself arrived at the palace. Olivia was surprised she hadn't expected to see him in the castle at all. The duke greeted the emperor with all courtesy. The emperor asked with a smirk what had prompted the duke's visit, as he was sure it was unlikely that he wished to have tea with him. The duke said with warmth and tenderness that he had come to see his wife because he was worried that the imperial palace was not quite familiar to her yet. The emperor looked at them and said with a smirk on his face that since they were newlyweds, it follows that their love is greater than even the emperor himself. The duke gently hugged his consort and asked with a smirk if the emperor was jealous of him. He didn't like this kind of treatment in his direction at all. The emperor was very angry with the duke because of his words. He realized that something had changed in him since he got married. It became harder for the emperor to read it, as it seemed to him that after the funeral he would rush out to find his own sister. But to the emperor's surprise, the duke did not. Because of his anxiety, he even introduced a man to the princess. The emperor looked at the newlyweds and wondered if he really loved her. The emperor looked at the young ones and said that the duke had changed a great deal, adding that he was very fond of his present consort. The emperor asked the duke if Lucas thought he was capable of some, or image of harming his beloved wife. Olivia was shocked, for she knew the truth. He killed her with his own hand, and after all that, he dares to say such words. The duke looked at him and said with restraint that he thought the emperor would by no means stoop to such baseness. Olivia gently took his hand. Lucas realized he'd let himself get hurt. After the emperor's words, Olivia suddenly remembered her own death. She was thrown into a shudder. Lucas looked at her and realized she was trembling. He took off his cape and put it on his spouse. He said with all the warmth in his voice that it was very chilly today and she must be freezing. She thanked him for his kindness. Everyone stared at them intently. The noble ladies began to whisper about the young couple, for they had heard of the duke's crush. And after seeing their warm and romantic relationship, realized that it was true after all. They said of their husbands that they were not even half as romantic as the duke. One of the ladies realized that Eve really didn't like what they were discussing and decided to quickly remedy the situation. So that said, the emperor is a very big romantic, and there are no other men like him in the empire. Citing his wife's ill health, the duke told the emperor that they would like to leave immediately. The emperor said it was a very fortunate coincidence, as he was already reluctant to drink tea. The emperor looked at the duke with contempt and told him to leave his palace. The duke was very upset by the emperor's words, as this was his palace by right of inheritance. The duke, according to all the rules of etiquette, thanked the emperor and bade him farewell. The emperor was angry. The mere presence of Herzen made him angry. The emperor was angry and decided to remove himself immediately. He left the lovely ladies in a hurry. Eva ran after the emperor while the young ladies shouted after her. Since the lady of the house had left, they realized that the tea party was over. Olivia looked at the whole situation from the outside, realizing that the lovely ladies had no sophistication whatsoever. She held her husband's hand and told him it was time for them to leave. They were about to leave when suddenly a young lady called out to Olivia. She said that if the Duchess wanted, she could attend the next tea party, as she would like to get to know the Duchess better. Duchess Tehran and her family were from the East, and they represented the neutrality of the aristocracy. Olivier knew she had no reason to refuse. Olivia, by all rules of etiquette, said she would gladly accept her invitation. She addressed her by title. The Duchess was slightly surprised, as she hadn't had a chance to introduce herself yet. Olivia said that in etiquette class, the first thing she memorized was the list of nobles. Duchess Tehran was a little surprised and said that she didn't believe the rumors that were about the young Duchess. Duchess Tehran looked at her new acquaintance and marveled, as she was a very refined and educated young lady. Looking at her, she realized that the socialite Eva had a rival, and she wanted to watch them fight. Olivia turned to Countess Lawrence, saying that she had seen her at the funeral. The Countess was surprised and said there were a lot of people in front of her eyes that day. Olivia said she'd like to get to know her better and offered her tea at her mansion. Since she was from another place, her only option to socialize with the noble ladies was to be invited to tea. The Countess hesitated a little, since she knew it would be a lot of fun to visit the Duke's estate, and Eve wouldn't be happy to hear about it. The Countess thanked the Duchess for the invitation, but citing her busyness, said she needed to delay her visit. Olivia wasn't surprised at her refusal, but she said that since this was a case, she would help her make a decision. Olivia stepped closer to her and told her that she knew the Countess's secret. With surprise, the Countess threw her fan to the ground. She didn't understand how a northerner could know her native tongue. She was uncomfortable with the idea that someone might find out her secret, since it could have gotten her into a lot of trouble. Olivia, with a defeated smile, asked if she would now accept her offer. The Emperor was furiously angry. He threw everything he could get his hands on and screamed. Eve soothed him, but he chased her away. But Eve screamed that this was her palace and she would be in it, so he doesn't have to worry about her. The Emperor didn't understand why things were the way they were. So he knew the Empress had been murdered and the Marquis had become meek after his daughter's death. He thought there were no more people to annoy him. But the Duke and Duchess would not let him live peacefully. He knew their freedom had to be cut off and crushed first. A butler came to see the Emperor. The Emperor said he was going to exile the Duke, so a letter to that effect had to be prepared. The Emperor didn't want the Duke to take anything away from him, and he knew that if he had to, he would cut off the Duke's head, like his father had done to the current Duke's father in the past. A few days later, the Duchess was informed that the Countess had come to see her. Olivia told the maid to take her to the garden. She talked to the maid some more and got ready to go to meet the Countess. Suddenly, Lucas came to Olivia's door. She hadn't expected him to come. Olivia knew he still didn't trust her completely, but decided to pick him up and told him she was done and they could go to the garden. The servants stared after them. The lady remarked that she hadn't seen all the servants on the estate and asked her consort if that was why he was so nice to her. Lucas asked her if she had heard about the new people hired at the estate, since he thought there might be a spy among the new servants. So he decided to be courteous, since anyone is capable of overhearing and then telling everyone. He took her hand, and they walked at a leisurely pace. Lucas said that of course it takes skill to mislead others. He said she did a great job of faking it at the wedding. Olivia knew she'd gotten bolder at the wedding out of desperation. Olivia asked her husband how he managed to fake it like that, since he was great at it. Personally, she didn't know how to act like that. Olivia asked to share the method with her if there is one. Lucas hesitated for a moment. He said he wished he could share a secret with her, but unfortunately, they had already arrived on the scene, so he'll tell her when she's done with all the business. He gently pressed her against the wall and told her she shouldn't call him by his title anymore. Olivia saw Countess and apologized to her for being late. The Countess said it was all right not to thank her for the invitation. Olivia invited the Countess to walk through the garden before tea. The Countess did not know how to speak to her or where to begin. Olivia said that the flowers in the garden are very beautiful and that the flowers are from the kingdom of Kaylee, and they are not very common in the Empire. The Countess asked the Duchess if she was aware of her connection to Kaylee. Olivia said, in her native tongue, one phrase. The Countess was surprised. She had not expected to hear such clear and accurate pronunciation. She walked over to the Duchess and clutched at her with her hands. She asked if that was potassium. Olivia said that if she were a potassium, she would be kneeling in front of the princess. The Countess was very much surprised and did not understand how the girl could know such a thing. The kingdom of Kali has been destroyed and wiped out by the Ron Empire, and the real identity of the Countess, who everyone was told was beheaded by Gusto, though in reality she managed to escape as far as the court palace, is the last princess and sole heiress. Because she was very much loved, she was not brought out into the light, and not many people knew about it, and so she was protected to this day. Olivia laughed and said that she couldn't reveal all her cards directly and decided to get to the real reason for inviting the Countess to the estate. The Countess was shocked. She didn't understand how the Duchess could figure her out if it wasn't even related to her heritage. She was sure she wanted to take advantage of her secret. Olivia looked at her from a smirk, saying she didn't know how she had survived so far with such retarded wits. The Duchess looked at the Countess and said it would be very kind of her to convey to her that their meeting was probably what her people and herself had been looking forward to. Olivia was sure they had something in common. The Countess said that the Duchess had apparently underestimated her and had thought in vain to snag her with mere words. Olivia realized that the Countess didn't want to talk to her nicely and decided to go on the offensive. Olivia asked the Countess what consequences awaited her if her true identity was revealed. The Countess knew that if her true identity was concealed, she would not be able to pay you her plan of action. And for the sake of the lost empire, she hid and changed her identity so that later she could take revenge on her offenders. She was constantly being told to lay low and wait for the right hour in the shadows, and to be lower than grass and quieter than water, and to be able to avenge the kingdom later. Olivia asked Countess how long she was going to invoke unworkable methods, since at what rate she was going to fail. She also said that Countess could get on her side and go undercover, and in return, the Duchess wanted to give the Countess all the information she needed. The Countess fell down. Olivia looked at her and said that it wasn't a suggestion, but rather she was threatening her. So much so that she needed to think about all the words. The Countess stood up and said that she needed to think about all the words she had said. Olivia asked her if she understood how high society worked. The Countess said that she really needed time to see if the Duchess was really capable of helping her. Olivia said understandingly, agreeing with her, since there were many lives at stake, but she also asked her not to delay in answering as she didn't have much time. The Countess decided to leave and not continue the conversation any further. It was very hard on Olivia's mind, as she was not at all used to this kind of behavior. She clung to the man's weaknesses and pressed on. It was very hard for the Duchess. She knew that always this method would not work. She needed not to intimidate people, but on the contrary, to gain their trust. Olivia's friend heard the men bustling about the garden, looking for someone. She didn't understand what they had going on there. Olivia saw Lucas catch the cat, and you could tell by its condition that it was hurt. Olivia remembered that since Lucas had been a child, he had never passed by an injured animal, and she realized that he had stayed that way until now, and it was fun for her to watch such a carefree husband. Lucas asked his spouse if the summer was over with things the girl said she was already quite sorted out. Lucas looked at the cat and his wife and said they looked a lot alike. The cat jumped out of his arms and ran. They didn't realize what had happened, and why she's running away. She ran up to Olivia and tangled under her feet. The girl couldn't stay on her feet and started to fall. Lucas caught his spouse. Olivia thanked him for helping her. The man was looking at his spouse and noticed that she had changed from the first time he met her. They stood very close, and he could smell her sweet scent. He was very familiar with it. Their raven came up to them and brought the cat. He asked what it was they were chatting about. The doctor said there was no need for them to react that way, as normal couples don't panic in such moments. He said they were newlyweds and needed practice.